Let's go back to our top story now on those calls for the Immigration Minister Scott Morrison to resign over his handling of the Manus Island right controversy. We're joined now by the Opposition's immigration spokesman Richard Marles at Parliament House in Canberra. Mr Marles, good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael. How are you?
I'm very well. The Greens are calling for Mr Morrison to go. Will you go that far?
Look, ultimately that's a matter for the Prime Minister, but I certainly think if you look at how things have been handled in the last week, there is a question about the Minister's competence, and there's a question about the grip that he's got on his portfolio and the certainty with which he's managing the Manus Island detention facility.
What are those questions in your view?
Well, what we see is a detention facility which is utterly fundamental to Australia's strategy of preventing boats coming from Indonesia, which is really important in terms of preventing people drowning at sea. Manus is central to that. We've had 3 very serious incidents since Scott Morrison has become minister, since the Abbott government came to power. 2 in 2 days last week, with the tragic result of a young man losing his life. And what we've got is a minister who has absolutely no idea of what's going on. Makes emphatic statements a week ago about what he saw as being the occurrences that happened, and they turn out to be totally wrong. And he tries to bury that by putting in place his retraction in the dead of night. All of this is not the behaviour of somebody who should be managing what is an incredibly important facility.
But as a former minister, wouldn't you appreciate that information you get from down the food chain can sometimes be wrong, particularly when we're talking about such a volatile situation on the ground at Manus Island?
Of course, which is why one needs to be very cautious in terms of how you present information, but also very transparent in the way in which you present information. And that's not what Scott Morrison has done. From day one, we have seen a trickiness about the way in which he and the government has gone about providing information in relation to asylum seeker policy and transparency in government. And that has meant many things have not been provided to the public, and we've got plenty of evidence of that in terms of things being hidden behind operational matters or operational reasons. But similarly, when information does come to hand, rather than talking in terms of advice, what we had last week were emphatic and very personal statements about pointing the finger at asylum seekers, saying that these matters happened outside, saying that if asylum seekers were going to breach the perimeter, that was going to be a matter for them, but at the same time giving a guarantee of safety if you stayed inside the boundaries of the facility. And obviously the question today is, where does that guarantee stand now?
Well, Mr Morrison made a point of reiterating that guarantee when he popped up yesterday. How long can that guarantee stand, given all we've seen transpire on the ground at Manus Island?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and we now need to understand the value of that guarantee, but more importantly, I think we need to have this independent inquiry, which has got to be full-ranging, and it has to include the Minister and his office, what they knew and when, and how the chain of information is getting to the Minister and how that information is getting to the Australian public. But we need to see that inquiry so that we can understand where the government is going wrong in the management of this facility and what steps can be taken to fix this so that this guarantee can have some value going forward.
Well, to be fair, Richard Marles, you made the point as well that Labor, of course, supports Manus Island, and you were just as hairy-chested as the coalition when you're in government in terms of being a hard line on asylum seekers coming to Australia. There's really not much different in the overall approach, is there?
Well, firstly, I don't like the term hairy-chested. This isn't a sort of a testosterone contest, and I have to say that the comments of the Prime Minister saying that we don't want a wimp looking after this is really the kind of comments that you would expect to hear in a schoolyard, not the sober statesman-like comments which relate to the running of a very, very serious facility. But let's be clear, the Manus Island detention facility is at the heart of the arrangement that Australia has with PNG, and that arrangement, more than anything else, has been responsible for stopping the flow of boats coming from Indonesia, and that in turn has meant that people are not drowning at sea in the numbers that we have seen in previous years. So from that point of view, I think the Manus Island Detention Facility has unquestionably saved lives. It is a very important facility. It's difficult policy, there's no question about that, but it needs to be run well. It needs to be obviously run in a dignified and humanitarian way, but it has to work, and Australia cannot afford for it to fall over, which is why we need to understand what's going wrong up there and what steps the government's going to take to fix it.
And as the government will keep telling us, the boats have indeed stopped. Therefore, Richard Miles, do you see we're getting closer to a point where we should consider closing down Manus Island?
Well, I think Manus Island has an ongoing role. What Manus Island does is take Australia off the table. And in taking Australia off the table, that was the piece of public policy which principally resulted in a reduction in the flow of boats coming from Indonesia. We saw a 90% reduction between the 19th of July and the time of our federal election. So we cannot underestimate the significance of Manus, and we cannot understate the number of lives that Manus is saving. And that's an important point for everyone to remember during these difficult times. But what it says is we need to have this facility running right. And therefore, the government have got to work out what they are doing wrong so they can fix it.
And finally, just on another issue, as a former Labor Minister, Richard Miles, how would you feel about cabinet documents that you were involved in appearing at Royal Commissions that the new government has called?
Well, there is a long-standing principle about cabinet confidentiality, and it goes to the heart of the Westminster system and the way in which our government is run. For more than a century since Federation, the sanctity of cabinet confidentiality has been maintained. So I look with concern, as I think many people do, at what this government is seeking to do in relation to the Royal Commission and those documents in particular. We know that the Royal Commissions that this government have put in place are much more about politics than they are about dealing with any matter going forward. The Labor government put in place a Royal Commission which was all about people. You know, the Child Abuse in Institutions Royal Commission was all about people. The Royal Commissions that this government puts in place are all about politics.
Richard Miles in Canberra. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks, Michael.